Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to do the spawning points for our actors. If I press play quickly and move around here, we can see we got our Xbot character here. I think if you followed along, you might have named them Ybot. That's fine. And over here, we've got our side scroll character, both in the scene. And don't worry about their positioning, that it's not perfect. We can always fix that later. And their health bars at the top as well, which is great. So it's a step in the right direction. But anyways, let's quickly go back here. And the first thing you want to do, off the bat, click on your C++, new fighter game character. And the first thing you want to do is we need to create a fighter game game mode. You can also call this your default game mode. And if you've noticed this over here, it's got a parent called game mode base. So to create this, you just right click, new C++, click on that and type in game mode base. Click on this, and once you've done that, you can press next, and you can call it default game mode or whatever the case may be, and then you'll have this. The first thing you want to do is open this up, and let me just minimize the stuff that you do not need to see. There we go. Game mode. Let me just close a bunch of this stuff quickly so that it's all a lot neater to follow. There we go. Minimize all of that. Double click on this. Now I'm only looking at game mode. The other thing I want to pay attention to quickly is the fighter game character. Alright, so we've got our game mode open that we just created and our fighter game character that we already have. And everything compiles perfectly fine at this point. You can test your build by clicking build solution. The only thing you want to add to your fighter game mode or your default game mode.h is this, primarily. And notice that we've also added this. Very important that you don't miss that. We're basically saying we need to include the library or the reference to our fighter game mode character, which is this over here. We need to reference it in our fighter game game mode or our default game mode. Probably should have named it something simpler, but you get the idea. So that's what this reference is. That's what this reference is. And then we're pulling on that reference over here, where we once again saying a fighter game character, which is linked to this over here. And the reference we're creating, that we'll be, because it's a U property we're going to be able to use in blueprints, is player 1 and player 2, which is going to help us have 2 players for spawning. And this is the fighter game game mode.cpp. Make sure that's the same as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There's not much more to discuss here. Build, make sure it works. Do not move forward if yours isn't working. It will crash your system if you made a mistake. It will crash your system if you try and proceed and the references aren't working and there's a code error. Make sure there's no code error here. It's quite a crucial point. This is kind of where I had to restart everything last time. All right, so now that you've done that, and you A4 away, you've created your fighter game mode character, you've created the code that works perfectly and it's successful, we can move on to the next part. And the next part would be, if we click on content, we're going to create a default game mode BP. And if we look at this, the parent is the fighter game mode. Okay, so if that's the case, we're going to right click, blueprint, and we're going to type in, because we know the parent is the fighter game mode, we're going to click on this. Do not use the game mode base, use the fighter game mode. That's the one you want to use, and you'll click select for next and you'll rename it to your default game mode BP. Open this up and let's start off on the event graph. So we've got event begin play, and to get all actors of class, you just click here, get all actors of class, boom, and you want to choose player, type in player start, and then you want to connect this to for each loop. It's again quite an easy one, for each loop, and you want to make sure the alt actors is connected to the array, and then you want to say spawn player. Now spawn player is a function we created, so you can just click on this plus sign and name it spawn players. And one thing that will be missing is the object of here. So you click, once you've done this, you can type in spawn players, and yours will be missing this over here. And the way to make that appear, let me just undo. The way to make this object appear here is to click on spawn players once it's here. In the input section, put a plus here for a new parameter, click on object, and over here type in actor and choose the circle one here. Boom, it's easy as that. And then you can connect the array element to the object, and then that will be set. Finally, we can now choose completed, and we can connect the completed to the create character HUD widget. And obviously, as you know, when you're working in Unreal, you type in create widget. Once you've done that, you can choose the character HUD. And I'm just going to undo. And obviously, this is quite simple. Get player controller, type it in there. And then over here, it's quite simple. Add to view, viewport, and then connect the target. And then compile and make sure it's ticked and everything is working. No need to make any mistakes here. Be extra careful. Then we go to the spawn players. Now, so the spawn players is the function we just created over here in our event graph for our default game mode. Perfect. So if that's the case, we're going to go to our spawn players, and we've got spawn players, the starting point, and we're going to connect it to cast to player start. So we just do this, cast to player. Oh, I guess spelling does matter. Player start. Boom, and there you have it. Control Z, Control Z, and you would connect the object to this, and we'll just stick with this first line, and we'll work on the bottom parts afterwards. Then you would connect this to the tag that we created, the reference tag. Which, if you remember, the reference tags that we created on, oh, maybe we haven't done this in this video. Right, so so the first thing you want to do is delete all the characters in the scene. Just delete them, and then over here, click player start, you can just drag this into the scene. And you can have two characters in the scene. Let's just actually put them closer together. And this one over here, in objects, you can just type in object, provided you can spell it, and put P1 as the player start tag. And then on the second one, because you're going to just drag 2 out of this, and type in P2. Delete any other player start tag. You only need 2 of these on the scene, a P1 and a P2 for the time being. And the tags are P1 and P2. P1, P2. Simple as that. All right, now that you've done that, we can go back to our default game mode BP, and we can connect as player starts. So now we type in, so we're going to player start tag. We're going to type in player start tag, get player start tag. And over here, I just type in equals. I get that. Control Z. And the important part is to make sure that this is connected to the bottom, and this is connected to the top, because it's either equal to the P1 or the P2. And then you want to connect this to a branch. Obviously, a branch is quite easy to get. You just type in branch, which splits things off to a true or false statement. And if it's player 1 is true, we want to spawn Xbox BP. So we do Xbox BP cast, well, whoops, sorry, spawn actor. Apologies. You want to type in spawn actor from class, and then you want to select Xbox BP. Well, in this case, you might not have Xbox BP. We will create that now, actually. So let's just delete that quickly, that reference. Okay, cool. So just connect the spawn actor in the meantime, and let's quickly create Xbox BP before we continue, because this is where we can't continue if we don't have it. All right, so in the C++ fighter game character, you'll notice that I created a new Xbox, right? So if we double click on this, we've got Xbox.h. We've added nothing to this in Xbox.cpp, which is so much more bare bones than our fighter character, right? Our a fighter character which has all this information that we probably want to include, which we might later on. But for now, just make sure you create a blueprint. Now, the important thing to keep in mind, if I hover over this has a parent class called fighter game character. So fighter game characters over here, which is the one with all that information in, the generic fighter game character or fighter game character has all that information in that it can reference, but it's a child to that. And the reason why we're creating this, each character you create, you want to create a separate blueprint if you want each of your fighting characters to be as dynamic as Tekken, where you can do loads of different moves. So once you've done that, we just save it and make sure it compiles fine. We're not adding anything to it at this point. But now we can go to content, characters, export, and inside of export we got the player 1 BP, which we might get back to later, but we create a new one called export BP. And this has a parent class, and the parent class is the export. So I'm going to right click, blueprints, and I'm just going to, in this search bar here, I'm going to type in export, and you select export and you select it, and then you save this one as export BP. This is the blueprint to that. And double tap on that so you can see this. And we don't really do much here other than add the mesh into the scene. And if you forgot how to do that, the export mesh, you just pick this up, drag it here into the export BP and drag it over here, and you can adjust the size. But having 2 in the scene is overkill, so I'll just delete that. And once you've got this in here, things you want to do is click export anim BP, which we've already created. Use the blueprint, use the mesh, and what else? There was something else here, I'm sure. I'm just quickly rushing through this. Collision overlay, where, hold on, overlap all dynamic. Determines whether the character can step up onto the component that controls that they can try to set it up. Okay, I'll just say yes. And I think that's about it. I think that's fine. So once you've done that, compile, and we are A4 Now that you have this as a reference point, the BP, which is the important one, we can go back to the default game mode BP, and you should be able to find the export, or whatever you called yours, export BP, as a reference. And on the second one, we'll just use the side scroller character, just so that it's a different character. Then over here, provided you did your code correctly, for me, this didn't work the second time I did this. It took a little while. But I just typed in player 1. Make sure this is ticked on. If you have to untick this, it'll probably not work. So set player 1. And you can connect this into here. I'll just delete that. And then just do the same for the bottom as well. And you should be fine. Compile. Everything should be working, and we can finally move on to the next part. Finally, now we can go to the character HUD that we have referenced in our default character. I believe we referenced it, yeah? I think we did. Yeah, we referenced it, yeah, in our default game mode, the character HUD. So we go, yeah, and last time we created player 1 health bar, player 2 health bar, player 1 health bar, player 2 health bar. Let's start off with player 1 health bar. Click on graph, and you'll notice that the 2 that we're focusing on in this tutorial is player 1 health bar, player 2 health bar. The same principle applies to stamina, but we'll get into that at a later stage. Right, so we've got player 1 health bar. Now, whatever you have here, delete it because it's the wrong cast. Your cast will probably not say cast to default game mode because you never had this before. Cast to default game mode BP or default game mode BP. So I'd say cast to, so pardon me, so the default game mode BP is this BP over here. We want to cast to this BP here. So we want to type in cast to default game mode BP. Boom. Let's delete that. The next thing you want to do is delete what it said here before, which might have been player 1 or something, and you want to type in get game mode. I think it's called get game mode. Boom. And you want to connect this to the outbound thing, and this is the one tricky thing I also struggled with. Just make sure your code is working fine. And now you want to cast this to a specific player. So it was like this, but now we want to say this is player 1 we're dealing with. This P1 player 1, get player 1, and connect it in here. Let's just confirm. Turn this on and just make sure it shows when we do this. Get player. Let's just type in player 1. See, for whatever reason, it doesn't show when this is ticked on. I have to deselect it and find get player 1 and then connect it in. And yeah, just you got to find the right get player 1 and it will connect. This also took a little while to figure out. And there you have it. And then do the same thing for player 2, except it's going to be target player 2. And you should be A4 way then. And you can compile. And we can move on to the next step. All right, now the next thing you want to do is go back into the export.h file we created for a specific character. If we go into Unreal, side scroller, C++, fighter game characters, we created that new file called export.h. That is the child to our fighter game character, or in the past it was called generic fighter game character. Once we've done that, now we can actually add some code to it, and we'll compile it once all the code is added. So for your export.h, which is your header file, you want to make sure that all this information is here. There's not much to say, just kind of have to look at it. Obviously you need to include these libraries or these files. So you want to include your, I've included the fighter game character.h file over here. I think it might have been there already, I'm not too sure. And also included the game framework / character.h file. The character.h file is like Unreal's main file for all your characters, and your main file is your fighter game character, and your export.h is a child to your fighter game character. So I think that's how I understand it. And once you've set that up, the first thing you want to do over here, you can see the class is saying that this is called a export, so it's called export. And I should have made the X capital, it's going to bug me, but I'll leave it. And the reference is fighter game character. In the past it was called generic fighter game character. And we want to set the default value for this character's properties over here, and we'll just leave it as is in the public sector. In the protected sector, we'll just have this called when the game starts. So basically all spawned. Left out a W there. And public folder, call in every frame, virtual void tick. And then over here we call to bind functionality to the input. And for this to work properly, you need to look at the export.cpp file and just do a little bit more. So once again, we set the default value as a export. It's case sensitive, so please keep that in mind. Because I named my export all lowercase, which was a mistake, I don't have A capital, X capital, I just have A capital because that always needs to be capital. So A export. Then I say over here, create a whole function around this. I say set this character to call tick every frame. You can turn this off to improve performance if you don't need it. We'll probably need it, so we just set it to true. And then we call when the game starts or when spawned, which is void. Basically, we spawning the character in over here. More information around that. The game starts or when spawned. Begin play, gets triggered, which is that blueprint. And then we say call every frame, which is the tick. It kind of manages the state. And then call to bind functionality to input. void AXBot setup player input component, U input components, player input components, and the super setup player input components, and that's it. And then you just want to build, make sure it all works, and if it works, you'll have succeeded, 0 failed, skipped, and then you can move on to the next part. Alright, the next thing we want to do, which is the final thing of this tutorial, is go to your project settings, and inside of your project settings go to maps and modes and change this to your default game mode BP, the file we just created. You can leave this on whichever you like. I changed it to the XBot BP character, but you can leave it on your side scrolling character. Let's type in side scroller character, and what that does basically is this: compile, play. You'll now be the other character, which is perfectly fine, but just for fun, I'm going to leave it on my XBot BP, not the XBot, but the XBot BP. And besides for that, there's just a few more things we need to change here just to prepare for the next session. We can leave the HUD on, player controls fine, game state base is fine for now, player state, this is all fine, but one thing we possibly want to change is local player. You want to make sure that this is ticked off. Outside of that, I think we're pretty much done, and hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.